I'm sure this isn't personal, Madeline said, tapping her acrylics against the edge of my desk like she was trying to summon Satan through laminate. But starting next week, you'll be reassigned out of scope for the merger project. Realignment, you understand. Realignment, like I was a crooked office chair. I stared at the woman I once mentored through her first leadership retreat, back when she still asked me how to format her budget spreadsheets. Now she was looking at me like I was the office wallpaper, something outdated but too expensive to rip off without causing damage. Behind her, the merger team's new org chart was displayed on her iPad like it was a prophecy. My name wasn't on it. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew Madeline. She was the type who mistook silence for surrender, the kind of executive who thought smirking counted as strategy. She wore her power like it was freshly purchased and still had the price tags dangling. The kind of woman who took more pride in her LinkedIn banner than her leadership record. And yet, while she rattled off corporate cliches, synergy, streamlining, strategic overlap, all I could think about was clause 7.4b, that one little clause with my name on it. She had no idea. In case you're new here, by the way, hi, I'm Sarah, the person they try to forget until they realize I'm holding the receipts. And if you're enjoying this ride so far, do me a small favor, tap that subscribe button and hit like. It actually helps the team more than you know, and who knows, maybe it'll keep Madeline's type up at night. Anyway, back to the venom in lip gloss. The reassignment wasn't even the surprise. I saw it coming weeks ago. First came the canceled meetings, then my access to the merger documents disappeared. Budget folders I created were suddenly moved. Slack threads got mysteriously quiet after I joined. When I asked about timelines for deliverables I owned, I got vague smiles and we're consolidating tasks from people who used to ask me how to spell procurement. Madeline's final cherry on top, an email CCing the entire leadership team, saying she appreciated my long-standing contributions and would ensure I had full visibility into the transition. Translation: pack your ego and sit in the corner. I didn't respond. I just closed my laptop, walked to the break room, poured myself the last of the stale coffee, and waited. Because I knew the real transition hadn't started yet. That afternoon, Ava, my former intern turned rising analyst, hovered by my desk. Her eyes darted toward the hallway before she leaned in, whispering like a kid sneaking candy out of a vending machine. Are you still reviewing the vendor continuity clause? I looked up at her, slowly sipping the burnt coffee like it was vintage red. Always, I said, and smiled. She blinked, then nodded like she knew not to ask more. That clause was my insurance policy. Quietly embedded months ago during a draft review, it required that any merger involving our top 3 clients must include formal continuity certification by the original project architect. Guess who that was? Madeline never asked. She just assumed contracts were like Instagram captions, vague enough to manipulate, pretty enough to ignore. That night, I went home and pulled the full agreement from my off-network backup. The digital copy, the email trail, even the tracked changes with my initials logged on every version. It was all there. I didn't need to fight her in meetings. I didn't need to whine about credit. I just needed to wait for the review meeting. The final merger contract readout, the one where legal would walk the client through every clause, and the one where I'd be sitting quietly, waiting for my moment. The smirk Madeline wore when she told me I was out of scope would be the last smile she wore for a while, because the only thing more dangerous than being underestimated is being contractually essential. It started 8 months ago in a windowless room that smelled like off-brand toner and cold sandwiches. No one ever glamorizes the early-stage merger work, the dry compliance reviews, the soul-numbing legal calls, the endless red lines in 8-point font. But that's where the real power lies, not in the headlines, in the footnotes. Back then, I wasn't even thinking about betrayal. I was thinking about risk. Our client, a global logistics firm with lawyers who chewed glass for breakfast, had one demand: continuity. They didn't care about our press releases or how many buzzwords Madeline could cram into a pitch deck. They wanted assurance that the systems we built, the ones I'd quietly maintained through 6 quarters of leadership turnover, would stay operational and untouched. Name the assurance officer, their counsel said on the call, voice flat as a dial tone. If she leaves, we reserve the right to pause service. Legal looked around like they were searching for a sacrificial lamb. I raised my hand. I'll do it, but I want it written. And so it was. Buried neatly in clause 7.4b, service continuity for client Delta requires ongoing certification by the listed assurance officer, Sarah Langston. That's me, by the way. Sarah, a woman who read every line of the contract while Madeline was busy hiring a brand consultant to update her headshot. It wasn't ego. It was armor. I knew how mergers go. The first to get gutted are the people who don't scream for attention but carry the weight. I didn't trust the shiny suits or the 30-day promises. I trusted the ink on the page, so I worked late. Pushed for legal language that wasn't just best effort but non-transferable assurance. I sat with our inside counsel over greasy Thai food and made sure my name wasn't just in the notes, it was part of the structure. Pillar level. At one point, she raised an eyebrow and said, "You sure you want this much visibility, Sarah?" It could make you a target later. Then they'll have to aim carefully, I said. After the clause was finalized and signed, I downloaded a full copy of the agreement, not just the PDF. The track changes, the internal review notes, the compliance timeline, all of it. I zipped the files, encrypted them, and moved them to an external drive I kept in a drawer at home labeled tax docs, because no one ever checks the boring stuff. Then I waited. The irony, they wanted me gone. They just didn't realize they couldn't afford it. The deal wasn't built on flair or FaceTime, it was built on conditions, on clauses, on invisible architecture I spent years holding up while people like Madeline polished their resumes and practiced smiling for Investor Day. She thought pushing me out of the org chart was a chess move. It wasn't. It was yanking a beam out of the foundation. And the best part? None of them had read that clause since the draft was signed. They didn't know the landmine I left glowing under their deal. This wasn't about me being in the merger. This was about the merger being built on me. When I looked at that contract again, my name there in black and white, tied directly to client retention and service continuity, I didn't feel fear. I felt gravity. Madeline didn't know it yet, but she just promoted herself into a trap. The kind of trap that doesn't make a sound until the door locks. And when it does, no reorg in the world can save you. Madeline strutted into the conference room like she'd just won something. Hair flat-ironed into submission, smile just a little too wide, blouse loud enough to be a warning. She tapped the side of her laptop like a drum roll before speaking. I want to start by thanking everyone for their flexibility during this exciting transition, she said, her voice syrupy enough to rot teeth. As we move toward integration with Norvale Group, I've worked closely with leadership to identify key talent for our new strategic ops pod. Ava's eyes flicked to me from across the table. We both knew what was coming. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, the only person in the room without a notepad. I didn't need one. I'd already read this script. Devin will take the lead on systems implementation, Madeline announced. Devin, who once asked me what a stakeholder matrix was, nodded like he'd just been knighted. Shayla will handle client comms and transition modeling. Shayla beamed. She was talented, no shade there, but still green. I'd mentored her through her first contract crisis 3 months ago, and Mitchell will oversee budget reconciliation and resource allocation. Mitchell, who once said I thought contracts were just suggestions, had been promoted above 2 senior analysts. One of them started tearing up. And Sarah, Madeline paused, and for a moment I thought she might surprise me. But no, she clicked to the next slide. We'll continue supporting legacy documentation initiatives, reporting directly to facilities until her offboarding is formalized post-transition. The air left the room. Nobody made eye contact, not even Devin. Legacy documentation, reporting to facilities, translation, broom closet duties, until they figured out how to erase me from payroll without triggering HR audits. Disgust rolled over me like cheap perfume in a crowded elevator. Not surprise. I've been in this game long enough to recognize when a knife is being twisted versus when someone's just waving it around hoping to scare you. Madeline didn't want my advice. She wanted my silence. Too late for that. By the time I got back to my desk, whispers had started, not the loud kind, the slack kind. The kind that starts with a hey, you okay, and ends with receipts. My phone buzzed, it was Ava, 3 screenshots. Madeline in the merger channel, the roadmap I developed for Client Delta will be our gold standard going forward. A reply from Devin, didn't Sarah build that? Madeline, she contributed, but the strategic framework was mine. Contributed. Like I'd been a barista handing her a latte while she sketched genius on a napkin. I replied to Ava with 3 words, keep everything encrypted. She sent back a thumbs up, then another message. Also, whispers say the bonus pool's being rerouted. Madeline's handpicked team is getting equity top-ups. Ah, there it was, the real currency of betrayal money. They weren't just cutting me out of the credits. They were gutting my share of the reward for building the thing they now stood on. I didn't need confirmation. I knew the contract bonuses were built into our old performance tiers. And Madeline had reorganized just in time to make sure those tiers were set under her. My bonus? Vaporized, but she'd made a mistake. Several, actually. First, she underestimated how loyal the people I mentored were. Ava wasn't just my mentee. She was my mirror into that shark tank. Second, she thought I'd beg. She didn't realize I already had a backup plan and that her name was about to be attached to one hell of a paper trail. I opened a folder labeled Continuity. Inside, contracts, timelines, red lines, and internal memos. My roadmap, the one she claimed she developed. It had metadata, version histories, author IDs. And if she thought Slack messages were damning, wait until she saw her name floating in a sea of revision logs she never touched. I looked at the office wall where Madeline had hung her Employee of the Quarter plaque, freshly polished and off-center. One day, I muttered to myself, dragging Ava's screenshots into the master folder, we're gonna print all of this. And we weren't going to frame it. We were going to file it with HR, with legal, and with anyone else who liked their contracts served with a side of humiliation. I scheduled the call under the subject line. Legacy documentation review quick clarification. Short enough not to raise alarms, vague enough to slip past Madeline's radar. Just another harmless Tuesday task from the woman now assigned to facilities support, which, for the record, hadn't yet asked me to inventory mop buckets. The invite went out to the client's general counsel, Laura Green, a woman I respected for her ability to spot BS in a hurricane of buzzwords. She accepted within minutes, replying with, "Always happy to chat with the adults in the room." God, I missed working with actual professionals. The call opened with pleasantries. I let her talk about her dog's ACL surgery, laughed at the right parts, asked about her vacation plans, and then I dropped the breadcrumb. I was reviewing the legacy compliance folder for Delta Systems, just wanted to make sure everything tied to the assurance clause was still up to date. You know, clause 7.4b, just want to make sure there's continuity as things evolve. There was a pause, not long, just sharp. Laura didn't ask what clause 7.4b was, of course she knew. She was the one who requested it be added in the first place. Wait, has someone moved on the continuity piece? She asked, her voice tightening. I played it casual. Oh, no, not officially. Just noticed a few documents shifting hands internally. Wanted to make sure the original signatory requirement, my name specifically, was still being honored before I flagged anything on our side. Silence again. Then, Sarah, to be clear, the continuity clause is binding. If you're not certifying continuity, the merger terms are incomplete. I let that hang in the air like a slow leak. I'm aware, I said, just confirming the clause is still considered active and enforceable. It absolutely is, Laura said. Do we need to escalate? No, not yet. I haven't been asked to waive it and I haven't signed anything. Okay, she said carefully, but if someone does ask you to waive it, I won't. I heard her exhale. A tight breath, the kind you take when you realize the foundation of your house might have been poured on jello. Then her tone shifted, less colleague, more ally. Can you send me confirmation that you're still listed as assurance officer? Just a formality for my notes. Already drafted, I said, clicking send. Time-stamped with metadata. She chuckled. Of course it is. What I didn't say, because I didn't need to, was that this conversation had now been logged, recorded, and documented from my end, too. Not because I didn't trust Laura. I did. But I wasn't leaving any room for misinterpretation. Not when Madeline was likely out there trying to fast-track her own version of a waiver through someone in legal who didn't even know what the clause was. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the frozen screen of my old company Zoom profile, grayed out and labeled contractor legacy support. Cute, there it was. The pivot point. Madeline thought she'd boxed me into irrelevance. But the only box that mattered was the one she hadn't opened, one labeled assurance certification required. And guess who held the key? I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a title. I didn't even need a damn office. I just needed that clause to stay untouched. And as of now, it was as live and lethal as a landmine in a rose garden. Sooner or later, someone was going to step on it. And when they did, I'd be right there, holding the original blueprint with my signature at the bottom. By Thursday morning, the smell of panic had replaced the smell of burnt coffee in the executive wing. Something had shifted. Not publicly, not officially, but the energy was different. Gone was the smug buzz of merger prep. In its place, quiet conversations behind closed doors, calendar events disappearing midday, and a new entry on the merger drive, 7.4b review urgent. I saw it all from the outside, or so they thought. Madeline, for her part, what insecure people in high positions always do, she tried to bulldoze through it. The whispers came in first. A friend in legal pinged me discreetly. She's asking for a global override of continuity clauses, wants to push it through before client lawyers dig deeper. That told me two things. One, she knew she was caught. And two, she still didn't understand the clause. There's no override without the assurance officer's sign-off. That's the point. That was always the point. It wasn't a formality, it was a fuse. One lit the second she erased me from the team. So when I got the formal request that afternoon, subject line contract review, final sign-off needed, I wasn't surprised. It was polite, corporate, and desperate all at once. They wanted me at the table again, not because they valued my insight, because the deal was locked behind a gate only I could open. I read the email 3 times, and I drafted my reply, happy to attend. On one condition, the session must be recorded, full transcript enabled. No exceptions, send, no reply for an hour. Then finally, understood, recording confirmed. Grim satisfaction settled in my bones like winter air. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was leverage, crystallized and sharp. I didn't need to swing it like a sword. I just needed to keep it steady in my hand while they realized who'd been holding the structure up this entire time. Then my phone buzzed. Ava. She was the only one still brave or foolish enough to keep me looped in. Screenshot, Madeline pacing in a side chat, her message to a senior analyst in legal. Langston stonewalling. She's holding the company hostage with that damn clause. Find a workaround. Followed by Ava's text, they're scrambling. Then she said you're holding the company hostage. I looked at the message for a long second, then typed back. She should have read what she signed. Ava responded with the skull emoji. Appropriate. In the background, I could hear someone wheeling in catering trays for the merger review. They still had the nerve to make it a catered event. No one wanted to admit the house was on fire. But the signs were everywhere. Someone from finance emailed a draft payout list. My name was still missing, but a red warning had appeared next to the final disbursement column, pending continuity clause verification. The escrow firm's liaison reached out with a gentle nudge. Is Miss Langston still the assurance officer of record for Delta Systems? Just needing confirmation before triggering release. I replied with a single sentence. Clause 7.4b remains active and has not been waived. They didn't push back. They just replied, thank you. It attached a hold notice. $190 million. Frozen because of one clause, one name, one signature. And as much as Madeline wanted to believe this was about drama or ego or petty politics, it wasn't. This was about compliance. About the fine print she didn't think mattered. About the one person she erased from her PowerPoint but forgot to erase from the contract. So when I logged into the Zoom call the next morning, clean shirt, steady voice, everything recorded, I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat calm and centered while the wolves started circling their own. They wanted my signature, they'd have to watch the replay first. And when it aired back, I wanted every word crystal clear. Clause 7.4b is binding, and I haven't signed a thing. The digital chime echoed through my headphones like a countdown clock. One by one, little profile squares lit up. Legal counsel, client reps, Madeline and her newest sidekick Devin, the escrow team, and finally a fresh name I hadn't seen before, Jonathan Ellis, listed only as due diligence Norvale Group. No one introduced him, because everyone already knew who he was. The room, if you could call a dozen silent webcams a room, was tense. And yet, Madeline still wore that same smirk, stretched too tight like a cheap tablecloth trying to cover a stain. Her hair was pinned back into what she probably thought looked executive. It just made her eyes seem more strained, more hollow. She led the meeting with the phoniest poise I'd ever seen. I want to thank everyone for coming together to finalize the outstanding deliverables. Our internal review has aligned all transition tasks, and we're prepared to proceed to final signature, pending minor clarifications on legacy clauses, of course. Of course. She gestured, more for the camera than necessity, to the firm's outside counsel, seated in a dimly lit office that looked more like a bunker than a boardroom. Laura Green, the client's general counsel, leaned forward, and read it. Clause 7.4b. All transitions of service related to Delta Systems, including data architecture and process continuity, must retain certification from the original assurance officer listed in the executed 2022 agreement. Certification is non-transferable and required for post-merger service guarantees. No certification, no continuity. No continuity, no final release of service contract. Silence, not even breathing. I waited a beat, let the silence steep like strong tea, then unmuted myself. My certification has not been requested. I have not signed a waiver, and I do not intend to. I may as well have dropped a bomb into the call. One of the escrow agents coughed. Someone else, probably from Norvale, let out a muffled Jesus. Devin glanced at Madeline like a kid who just realized the grown-up forgot their lines. Madeline cleared her throat. I believe, if I may, we had assumed continuity would be interpreted as institutional, not individual. Laura cut her off, eyes sharp. We didn't assume anything, Madeline. The clause is specific, intentional, and was inserted at our request. That assurance isn't a metaphor. It's a legal requirement. More silence. Then, like an executioner arriving late to a hanging, Jonathan Ellis unmuted. His voice was flat. No emotion, no drama, just corporate death. Who, he said, approved removal of the listed assurance signer from project oversight? It wasn't a question. It was a scalpel. Madeline blinked. Well, the transition plan was handled by the Strategic Ops Pod, with direction from myself, under authority granted in Q2 reorg protocol. That wasn't the question, Ellis said, voice colder now. I asked who approved it. Name, role, signature, she stammered. Devin looked like he wanted to crawl inside his coffee cup. Nobody answered, so I did. No approval was ever documented, because no one thought to check the contract before reorganizing. Ellis didn't reply, just typed something, then muted again. Madeline's smirk, gone, not faded. Not softening, just gone. Laura leaned back in her chair, arms folded, and said, so unless Miss Langston is restored to the oversight role and signs the assurance certification, the client cannot proceed. The message was clear. No signature, no service. No service, no payout. No payout, no merger, and the person who could change that was currently listed as facilities support in their org chart. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. The room had already gone quiet. And in that silence, everyone finally heard what I'd known for months. They built the deal without reading the blueprint. And now the foundation was cracking, loudly. By the next morning, the merger was no longer pending. It was paused. Officially, diplomatically, and devastatingly, merger process temporarily suspended pending compliance review. Unofficially, frozen solid. Norvale Group statement, tucked neatly into a 2-paragraph email, cited unresolved contractual obligations and assurance discrepancies as the reason. No one said my name, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew. The internal Slack channels lit up like Christmas in hell. My phone buzzed nonstop, ping after ping from former colleagues suddenly just checking in or hoping you're doing okay. A few offered me lunch, coffee, a safe space to vent. Cute. Where were they 3 weeks ago when I was being reassigned to facilities? One message cut through the noise. It was Laura, the client's GC, her subject line, confidential discussion. Inside, we would like to formally request your return to the Delta Systems oversight role. If you're not part of this merger, we're not either. Let me know what you need. No fluff, no apology, just leverage. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. For months, I'd kept calm while they erased me from PowerPoints, calls, and strategy docs. I watched them scramble over each other for bonuses tied to work I built. And now, they couldn't move an inch without my permission. I replied with a 2-line email, "Thank you for your trust. I'm open to rejoining in an advisory capacity under direct contract. Please route discussions through your outside counsel." They responded within the hour. By noon, my new title was drafted: Special Compliance Advisor to Client Delta, reporting directly to General Counsel, with back pay and profit share. Retroactive to Q1 before Madeline's first email realigning me out of the picture. No middle managers, no optics, no spin, just quiet authority restored. And Madeline? Word came down that afternoon: administrative leave pending internal review of compliance oversight decisions. That's HR speak for she's done, but we're still figuring out who gets her parking spot. Ava texted me a screenshot of the announcement posted on the intranet. Underneath, someone had commented, "Guess realignment works both ways." I laughed for the first time in weeks. They tried to bury me under their ambition, but they didn't realize I'd built the damn foundation. And now the client had made it clear: no Sarah, no deal. I didn't gloat, didn't update LinkedIn, didn't send any snarky emails to the execs who ghosted me. Instead, I did what I've always done: put my head down and read the fine print. Because the merger wasn't dead. It was just learning a lesson about who holds the pen when the real contracts get written. My inbox turned into a digital confessional booth overnight. Subject lines read like a parade of corporate guilt. Need to clarify deliverables, following up on oversight misalignment urgent. Bonus structure question NDA draft for updated advisory terms, apology for miscommunication. Hope we can chat. The apologies came first, dressed in soft language and passive voice. No one took responsibility. They just regretted the confusion and understood how this may have been perceived. Like I'd hallucinated being removed from my own project and reassigned to facilities because I didn't drink enough Kool-Aid at the quarterly all hands. Next came the NDAs, 4 drafts in 24 hours. All slightly different, all with clauses about non-disparagement and retroactive confidentiality. Funny how people only value your silence after your voice costs them millions. Then came the panic. Finance asking if I had visibility into current bonus pool obligations. HR wondering if I had any recollection of the executive equity timeline approvals. One particularly bold note from procurement asking if I could confirm whether the Delta Systems continuity assurance was, ever actually waived. I ignored most of it. Let them twist in their lanyards a bit longer. Then Ava messaged me. She didn't even bother with a hello. "You'll love this." Madeline told the internal review team that the 7.4B clause was added by an intern. I stared at my phone. Reread it twice. Intern? Yep, said it was a junior paralegal's addition during compliance back in February. Claimed she didn't realize it was operationally binding. It's literally in the client's demand memo. Oh, I know, but she's spinning. Hard. I let that sit for a second, then sent Ava a photo. It was the original draft of the clause. My notes scribbled in red ink, my signature, and a timestamped email from legal titled, "Revised 7.4B language per Sarah's request final approval." "Time to escalate," I typed. "Popcorn ready," Ava replied, so I scheduled a joint session. No more quiet whispers or corridor politics. This would be formal. 2. Board legal team, Norvale Compliance Office subject. Addendum review clause escalation. I requested a full meeting, recorded, documented, timestamped, with both companies' legal and compliance leads present. I'd already seen how this game played when no one was looking. Then, during that call, once everyone had reintroduced themselves and confirmed recording was enabled, I brought it out. Clause 9.3d. In the event of a breach or violation of continuity clauses following execution of a signed letter of intent, law, any executive or managerial bonuses tied to said merger shall be considered null and void and must be returned within 30 business days of notice. The silence that followed could have frozen lava. I watched one of Norvale's board attorneys reach for his glasses like they might help him read his own panic better. Another whispered something off camera, clearly not muted. I calmly scrolled through the PDF, highlighting the clause for all to see. It's standard language. Said voice even protects the client and the acquirer in the event of, let's say, unmonitored ambition. No one spoke. I didn't need them to. They all knew what it meant. If the merger was deemed compromised due to Madeline's realignment, her bonus, gone. And if she'd already received it, returnable, in full, with interest. I clicked my mic off and sipped my tea. Controlled vengeance isn't about screaming. It's It's about letting the room sweat while you speak fluent contract, and watching the empire they built on shortcuts and backstabs start to crumble, one clause at a time. The final boardroom session was scheduled for 9 a.m., but the real meeting started the moment I walked in. I didn't wear power colors. No crisp blazer, no eye-catching brooch, no bold lipstick to scream, "Look who's back." I wore gray. The kind of neutral that makes people uncomfortable because they can't tell what's coming next. I took my seat at the long glass table, opened my leather folio, and said nothing. Across from me, Norvale's acquisition team sat in stiff suits, eyes darting between papers like they were scanning for mines. Our internal execs looked like they hadn't slept in a week. Some of them probably hadn't. I spotted 3 fresh faces, new lawyers, likely brought in to clean up what Madeline left behind. She wasn't in the room. She wasn't invited. The chair of the board, man who'd once referred to me as ops support even though I'd built the ops framework from scratch, cleared his throat. "We've resolved the structural issues," he said, trying to sound calm. "Pending final sign-off from all parties, we'd like to proceed with certification and escrow release." I nodded once, slow, didn't say a word. He shifted in his seat. "Sarah, we'd like to request your signature confirming continuity assurance per clause 7.4b." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my folio, pulled out the marked-up copy of the final agreement, and slid it across the table. There, in ink and unmistakable handwriting, beneath my printed name, I'd written, "Addendum approved upon termination of VP Madeline Crane." It wasn't a threat. It was a condition. The room went still, not just quiet, still. The kind of still that happens before a verdict or a storm or an execution. The board chair stared at the note, blinked, looked up. "This is non-standard," he said cautiously. I finally spoke. "So was being reassigned to facilities while holding a binding assurance clause worth $190 million. Silence. One of Norvale's attorneys leaned over to whisper something into the chair's ear. The chair didn't nod, just stared at the paper like it might bite. I gave them a minute. Then I said, calmly, "You want my signature. Then enforce your own accountability clause." I slid the pen across the table. "Use it or don't." They voted on the spot. 3 abstained, 5 voted yes. Motion carried. Madeline Crane terminated effective immediately. No press release. No farewell email. Just a silent deletion from the org chart like she'd been a formatting error. I picked up the pen, signed my name at the bottom of the assurance page, and passed it back. Done. The merger unlocked that same afternoon. 6 weeks later, my payout hit. Full advisor compensation, 2 quarters retroactive equity, and a quiet thank you note from Norvale's board chair that managed to avoid any actual apology. Ava texted me the second the news went live. "They're calling it a successful merger." Lol. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed a clean copy of the contract, signatures, amendments, final clauses, and slid it into the same drawer where I'd kept the backup drive all those months ago. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, stepped out onto my back deck, and watched the sun drop behind the trees. They thought they'd buried me under bureaucracy. Turns out I was the clause. And the only thing more dangerous than being underestimated is being right. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.